Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you had a good lunch break. Next, we're going to have a conversation that focuses about how we talk about our oceans and Great Lakes and why it's important. It's called Communicating in a Crowded Space. Laying the groundwork for our panel discussion is Josh Luger, who's General Manager for Environment at News Deeply. He will give an introduction to News Deeply's work, providing a new way for people to engage on important topics and the importance of working together to get information out. Todd Woodley, News Deeply's editor for the environment, will then join us to lead the discussion with our panelists. Let me now turn to videos from our sponsors. Thanks. I also want to thank NOAA as a signature sponsor, our co-host sponsors, the Campbell Foundation, the Moore Foundation, and the Ocean Foundation. Our champion sponsors, IFAL and the Stevenson Foundation, our friends, partners, and contributors. Once again, I always like to thank them so much because without their support, this conference wouldn't be available. So now I'd like to turn to Josh to talk about News Deeply.
Hi, everyone. Nice to be here today. My name is Josh Luger, and I am the GM for Environmental Platforms at News Deeply. And News Deeply, in case you aren't aware, we are a mission-based media company. We create specialized news platforms for important topics. And what I'm going to be talking about today is how to communicate science in a noisy world, which is a lot of what we do at News Deeply. So before I get into communicating the science piece, I want to talk a little bit about what we mean when we say noisy world. And in a nutshell, we're obviously referring to today's current media and information environment. And it's easy to say, I think we all know it because we all live it, that we are experiencing right now a content overload. When you look at it, we used to have an environment where there'd be a few media companies that captured society's collective attention, a few sources that we all relied on that basically is where we all got the news. With the evolution of digital media and cable news media, obviously now there are incredible amount of sources that have entered the fray, all professional media organizations, but a lot more sources competing for basically the same amount of attention that we all have to give to their news and information. But what's really created a huge increase in the amount of sources producing content information are not necessarily media organizations, but platforms. So in a world of Twitter and Facebook and all the other platforms we all spend time on, it's no longer just media organizations that might have significant media credentials and news budgets, but it's everything, anyone who could basically create a Facebook page or create a Facebook post. Those are all news sources. And so it's easy to see the connection between more news sources ultimately equaling more news content. And to give you some sense of just how much content we are swimming in right now, here are a few numbers. These are all big numbers, and they're all daily numbers, as in there's over 4 million hours of content uploaded each day to YouTube. For comparison, a 24/7 news network, if they're producing and running content every minute of every day, that's less than 10,000 hours of content a year versus 4 million on YouTube just in a day. There's 3.5 billion posts that are liked on Instagram every day, and 4 billion posts that are posted on Facebook every day. So we have more sources and we have more content. That contributes to a huge content overload, but another key piece of that equation is the fact that the type of content that we're engaging with is different, in that all the other content we used to engage with came from sources that had an editorial sensibility. Human editors would decide what went on their homepage, what went on the top of the newspaper, based on what they thought was the most important thing for society to pay attention to. But on a platform scale, where algorithms are making decisions not for what's most important, but for what is most likely we are to engage with, it's no longer the big stories that necessarily make it to the top. It's videos about adorable couples that have been married for 75 years. So that's quite a change in terms of not just more content, but the type of content that's rising to the top. Content that might have been about an important environmental topic could easily be replaced by an Instagram picture of someone lounging in an important environmental context. So content overload of a very specific type presents a very significant challenge. And it's not just because it's an incredibly crowded space, which by definition means any one piece of content on any one topic is going to be harder for them to crack through, but it also impacts the type and the way we consume and engage with content. And so because we live in this bubble of content overload, where we're sorting through thousands of pieces of content a day on dozens of different platforms, the result is we want to get through it quicker. And so Chartbeat, which is a company that manages or analyzes data across engagement on hundreds or thousands of publisher platforms, did a study they put out a few years ago. They said a majority of consumers in America spend an average of 15 seconds or less consuming a piece of content. 15 seconds. So that's about enough to read a headline, maybe see an image, read a few sentences, and then you're on to the next piece of content that you have to get to. So people aren't spending a lot of time actually engaging with content anymore. And on top of that, if you think about lots of sources, lots of content, and then those sources being anyone from an individual with a Facebook page all the way up to an established national media organization, the result is confusion. And there's a lot of other factors that, of course, contribute to diminished trust in the US mainstream media, but that diminished trust is by now a fact. That chart on the left is a Gallup tracker poll they put out every single year. It asks what percentage of people in America have a fair or great deal of trust in the American media. And as you can see, the drop just from 2015 to 2016 dropped from 40 to 32%. Just 20 years ago, in 1997, it was above 50%. So collectively, we not only have more content and people spending less time on each piece of content, but they're actually trusting what they're reading for that 15 seconds even less than they used to. And as if that problem isn't challenging enough, it's especially acute for substantive, important topics like the environment, like oceans. Again, for reasons that are all pretty obvious to understand. On the right, this is a chart from Parsley, which is another media analytics company, and it kind of breaks down by topic and by platform where and what people are engaging with. So blue is Facebook, red is Google, and by topic you see the percentage of digital interaction with different types of content, where it's coming from. And what you see on the top there are things like lifestyle, local events, entertainment. Those are the things that do best in the platform environment that we're talking about. Light topics rise to the top. When you're trying to get between lots of pieces of content, you're on your mobile phone, you're looking for a few seconds of entertainment, it's not surprising that those topics do best. It's also not surprising that, as a connection to that, positivity tends to prevail. So in that context, we were scrolling through phones, looking for a momentary kind of relaxing piece of content to keep you entertained. It's pretty easy to envision, a cute puppy and a headline, 21 puppies so cute you will literally gasp and then probably cry, for you to take that 15 seconds and spend time with it. Now imagine that headline's a picture of a piece of a glacier falling off or ocean levels rising, and the headline is 21 environmental facts that are so scary you will probably gasp and then probably cry. Not as likely to click on that, unfortunately. And so, as if that's not a big enough problem, the other piece is that, going back to that 15-second attention span, as we all know, science tends to be a little bit more complex than a picture of a puppy. And so complexity requires attention. It also, to understand it, it requires trust. Two things that are limited and scarce resources, and more limited and scarce every single day. So that's the noisy world that we talk about. And that's a big, significant challenge. But I'm here today, and Todd's here today to host a panel about how, while that's a big challenge, it's an important one, and it's a possible one to meet head-on and actually overcome. And in News Deeply, that is specifically within those challenges is where we live and do all of our work. We don't do entertainment. We don't do any of the easy stuff. We focus on the hard, important stuff and figure out how to crack through, and that's why we're here today to talk about that. To give you some sense of what News Deeply is about, our founding origin starts with our CEO, Lara Satrakian. Lara was a Middle East correspondent for Bloomberg and ABC News, and she was stationed there starting in 2007, 2008, so when obviously still a U.S. presence in Iraq and the region, but it was diminishing from the height of the war. And so what she saw when she was on the ground there, she thought it was her dream job. She thought she'd have a great time covering it, but she found a lot of problems when she was on the ground and started to report. And some of the issues she found is that, first off, there wasn't enough reporting on it. As the U.S. Involvement and presence in Iraq and Afghanistan dwindled, so too did the coverage in the U.S. It was harder to get her reporting on air or read in the U.S. Less than 1% of news coverage in 2007 and 2008 were dedicated to those two wars. Secondly, insofar as it was being covered, the only interest there was in coverage back here in the U.S. was in stories that were about us. So what was going on in Iraq and how it mattered to us. But what wasn't being covered was what was happening on the ground. Who were the players there? What was it like for families, refugees, the people living there on a daily basis? The true stories that were coming out of the ground that she most wanted to report didn't see light of day. So if you then ladder up, if you start missing those stories, what we then collectively missed were bigger stories, things that were bubbling up that ultimately led to things like the Arab Spring and the rise of ISIS, which wasn't being covered in a proactive way in the US or international media. And then finally, what she saw is how all of that was leading to a very unstable and unsettling situation in Syria, which was another thing that we missed before it exploded. And that's where she raised her hand and said, there has to be a better way. Because what she saw happening in Syria with respect to that is she knew it was what she called a species-level issue. It was the kind of issue that matters to millions or billions of people. It impacts regional and international security implications, yet it wasn't being covered. The people who were working on it were invisible to us, people that were living it were invisible to us, and sometimes invisible to each other. There was no context and understanding about what was happening on the ground every day. So with that, Lara decided to launch News Deeply with a very specific focus through a specific vertical, which was Syria Deeply. And Syria Deeply launched, and it did exactly what she thought was missing in the ecosystem. It covered an important topic that was hard to crack through the noise, but every single day we put out content, we focused on telling the stories that she thought was being missed, and to fast forward very quickly, a few years later, we become a go-to resource on that topic. And not just a few years later, within a few months, we had then Secretary of State John Kerry engaging on conversations we were having, calling what we're doing very important. We also had the ambassador literally saying, and take a moment to actually take in this quote, when I need to check if something is true, and I don't know exactly what it's referring to, but I'm assuming, is it intelligence, is it reports from diplomats, first-person accounts, I go to check Syria Deeply to make sure it's true. That was all within a few months. So it just gives you a sense of how quickly, how big the gap was to begin with, and then how quickly, with a certain model and certain type of focus, we were able to crack through the noise and provide information on Syria that was important to the community working around it. So everyone from folks at the State Department, to people on the Council of Foreign Relations, to diplomats around the world, to think tanks, everyone that works around the community found Syria Deeply to be very useful within a small amount of time. Needless to say, we then took a look out and said, what other topics fall into the same category, being very important, that we need to step into? And environment came up. And so we launched Arctic Deeply, which is, as you can imagine, focused on the Arctic a few years ago, as we did Water Deeply. And Water Deeply, when we launched it 2 years ago, was focused exclusively on the California water crisis, the drought. And we saw a huge need to step in there. Fast forward to today, we have 25,000 people reading content on California water every month on our platform, 5,000 people subscribed. 80% of those people are from the community that work in and around the issue. So they're professionals, highly engaged, highly knowledgeable, but still tuning in every day to see what we have to do. 2/3 of them are from California, means a third of them aren't, so people are tuning in from around the world because obviously water in certain respects is a global issue, and what's happening in California and how they're dealing with their crisis is of relevance to people all over the world. So we've done a very good job at cracking through, covering California water where no one else was doing it before. And as a result of that, because we had a good experience cracking through covering California water, we just, as of last month, have expanded the scope of Water Deeply to cover the American West. 11 American states are now being covered, and you can see how that could ultimately become a national, international vertical that covers water all over the place. So those are a few examples of topics that we've been able to crack through the noise on. And so I want to walk through today kind of what is our playbook for doing that in this crowded environment that we engage in. And so the first thing to understand before we get into what our playbook is once we engage on a topic is I want to give you some sense of how we actually decide what topics should we engage on. What are the things that kind of have to be true in order for us to be able to then go out and break through that noise in this environment? So there are generally 4 things we look for. We want an issue that's timely and species level importance. And that's kind of what I said before as the genesis for Syria Deeply, which is it's the kind of thing where there are developments happening every day. People working on it are invisible to us and invisible to the people around us. And it's the kind of thing that because of that, we're missing the story. And if we miss that story, it rises to the level of importance to millions or billions of people. We can't afford to miss it. The other thing we look for is a lack of consistent mainstream coverage. So to crack through in this environment today, I can't underscore how important it is to not just write an article or put out a piece of content when there's a big headline or a catchy image or a big scientific report that comes out, because then you might be able to capture some attention for some moments in that day. But to really crack through the noise, it's about consistent coverage that's day in, day out, that people can rely on, depend on, and expect. That's how you rise above the noise. A lot of the topics we engage with, in fact, all of them, lack the kind of consistent mainstream coverage that we think is necessary to break through the noise. And the type of coverage that I'm referring to, and I'll go into this more in a little detail when I go through our playbook, is we look for a specific type of coverage that's lacking. And we think it's comprehensive, independent coverage. And really briefly, again, I'll go into it more in a bit, but what that means is it's not just a matter of conveying information. A report came out, this is what the report says, but it's a matter of providing context and understanding around the topic, a full 360-degree view about what that information that came out actually then means to various members of a community, that is what we're actually ultimately trying to get at to help crack through the noise. And finally, you've heard me use the word community a lot of times. Working in and around the topic, and I'm sure most of you know this since you're here at this conference with respect to oceans, are generally, there's a passionate, engaged community consisting of a few different buckets of folks that work and live and breathe around a specific issue. When we think about community, this is the community for Water Deeply. It's 5 different buckets. We think first of policymakers, and this is in no specific order, I should say. Policymakers, people setting policy around the specific issue. In the case of water, we have the California State House members there reading us, and it goes all the way through to readers in the United States Senate and the United States House. Obviously, businesses are very interested. They use, they consume, they sell, they produce, they market water. So you might be Nestle Waters, who's producing bottled water in California. You might be a hotel chain like Hilton that uses a lot of water. You're engaged and interested in what's happening on the issue. Experts, scientists, universities, people putting out the reports, people doing a lot of the work in the field, we want them to be engaged in the community as well. NGOs and nonprofits, obviously as well, doing a lot of the good work out there on the front lines. We want them to be engaged in the community, and we want people to know about what work they're doing and raise their profile as well. And then finally, as I said, that's about 80% of our audience for water. The other 20% is a very significant piece. That's the engaged public. So when you think about it, in terms of ultimately trying to crack through the noise, the first step is to engage the community that's working around the issue and create a product that they consume and find useful and actually participate in. But the next piece is talking to an engaged public. The reason why they're so important, these are passionate citizens, individuals that have no professional stake in oceans, or water in this case, but they care about it. The reason why they're important to reach is because if you level up to trying to crack through the noise, it's these passionate individuals that are going to be most likely to go out and share content with their friends, talk about issues with their friends. They're the gateway to the general public who we also want to reach. And so they're a very important piece. We try to create it to be useful to the first 4 buckets of folks, but we also see that the 5th bucket is very important. If we do our job right, they're going to come along. And so what we look for in terms of community is it's very important to have these people engaged and have a centralized place where they can go, discover each other, meet each other, learn about each other, and then actually inform and help contribute to a product that covers that issue. And so when there is no centralized home for a community like this around the topic, that's another thing we look for in saying we could step in here and create that home. So once all those conditions are satisfied, we generally run by 3 basic rules that I'm going to walk through that are our playbook for once we decide we're stepping in and going to try to crack through the noise on this topic, here are the 3 basic buckets that we think about in terms of how to go about doing it. And it's riffing off of before. The first is we look to provide consistent, focused coverage. And so what I said before is really a key piece of that. We like to engage in ongoing coverage. So Todd, who you'll meet in a bit, does a lot of research before we launch a platform. And he talks to scientists in the field, members of the community that I just referenced, to see what's missing. Do we have a need here? If so, what does it look like? And in our research and talking about a lot of environmental issues and oceans as well, it's come up that there's sporadic coverage of a lot of issues. So again, there might be a report that comes out that says the Great Barrier Reef is in trouble, and by this year, something like this is going to happen. We might discover a new species underwater. That's a great way to crack through some coverage, but if that's followed up by nothing the next day and nothing the day after that, you're not going to be able to crack through the noise. It's important to cover things day in, day out, and also follow issues over time. So you don't just give one piece of information, and then a year later there's another piece, and in between, what are you expecting people to consume or read and understand? How are you going to crack through? And so when you look at, for example, with Water Deeply, the Delta Water Tunnel Project, that's something that gets debated on a policy level for a while. That's something that then has to get actually passed. Then it's something that needs to get implemented. Then there's different phases of implementation. Government learns from the initial phases and then modifies from there. And so there's a lot going on every single day with that story. And that's something that we commit to covering over time, again, because the community needs it and demands it. And for us to have full understanding, that's the type of coverage we need to provide. And that's how you crack through. The third piece under consistent focus coverage is also an important one, which is we don't like just looking back, we like to look forward. And so telling people this is the way things are right now is very important, but also giving them a sense of what's going to be is important as well. And so we like to feature solutions-oriented stories that focus on new technologies and new strategies. And in Todd's research, again, it's something that comes up a lot, and there's not enough of that. So what are the new products? What are the new markets? Who are the new leaders, the individuals coming up with solutions? And how do we make them and their solutions and their models visible to everyone working in and around an issue? It's valuable to the people that are in the community, and it's valuable to people working on the solutions to be a part of our coverage. The next piece is what type of coverage? Well, we like to ensure comprehensive and tailored coverage. The first thing we mean by that is cover all sub-issues. Again, with respect to oceans and water and a lot of topics, we tend to see that some sub-issues get a lot more coverage than others. There is a degree of relative importance, but we need to make sure to cover something comprehensively. So it might be that plastic pollution in the ocean, obviously a super important topic, gets a lot of coverage, but are we covering that more on a relative basis than a lot of other topics that need coverage that are easily missed on a daily basis? That's a question we need to consistently be asking ourselves, because ultimately what we're trying to get at for that community of folks that work in and around an issue is being able to provide full context and understanding. So again, we're not just looking to convey information. That's not enough to crack through the noise. To really crack through the noise, it's a matter of creating content and coverage that gets as efficiently as possible to the context and understanding. So not this paper just came out, but what does that paper mean, and where is that taking us, and what do folks in the community think about what the next steps are going to be as a result of that paper or that study? And so what you see on the right here are a few examples. If you're willing to commit yourself to that process and thinking backwards and saying, I have this story to tell, and I want to figure out what's the absolute best way to convey context and understanding, and to the third point, actually capture attention and hold on to it, we think, okay, what's the best way to tell the story? And the answer is going to be different depending on the issue, depending on the story. It might be for some stories, it requires a long-form investigative piece. For some stories, it might be covering it as a series over time. Others, it might be something more visual. It might be a video. It might even be audio. We've also created formats that we've found to be highly engaging. So on the right there, you see the executive summary. This is something we put out with Water Deeply every single week. It's a mind meld of what our managing editor is seeing, thinking, hearing throughout the week. She puts down her thoughts, sends it out based on all the work she's done, all the folks she's spoken to, and that has become our most engaging product. People engage with that the most, and on average for 5+ minutes, not 15 seconds. And so another thing you see here is literally an article titled, What You Need to Know About California's $17 billion Water Project. It's not just a matter of, hey, this water project was passed today, and here's a 500-page report of what it is, but it's clear as to what the headline is. We outline it. We actually tell you we're talking to 2 experts, and the formatting is also important. We tell you about how much time you should commit to this before you read the article. We're telling you we're talking to 2 experts about a specific act. We're priming you for what this is going to be, and again, working backwards from what's the story and what's the absolute best way to convey context and understanding so we can crack through the noise and get people actually engaged. What that means at a bigger level is every time you're writing a piece of content or thinking about a story, you need to test, you need to optimize, you need to maybe try to tell it in a few different ways, try a few different formats, see what's working best for telling a specific story. And you'll see as you do that over time, you'll get better and better at telling different stories on different sub-issues in different way. And as a result, all of your products, every piece of content and piece of journalism you put out is going to be more engaging, have a better chance at cracking through the noise. So those are the 3 core things that we generally look to do in terms of putting a model forward to crack through the noise on an important topic. And well, the two. The third being is, those are tough things. Those are not easy. I don't want to underscore how difficult that is and what a commitment it is to be able to even set on a journey to be able to achieve that, which is why the third point is important as well. What we like to think about at News Deeply, and we use it, is the fact that we don't have to do it alone. It's okay to get by with a little help from your friends. And the scientists we talk to, they know it. They live it. Communication is half, and sometimes it's more than half the problem. We can't solve an issue unless we can explain the issue and get people to understand the issue. And so we think about our news platforms really as communications platforms. Again, we have that community we want to reach, and we want to be communicating most effectively with them. From our standpoint, we're putting out news and information, but we don't view the relationship as merely one that's just we produce, our audience consumes. We actually, to be able to communicate, we think about our audience as more than just readers. They are a community, and that's why I keep using that word a lot, because it's true. And what we think about by community means, just like any community you might be a part of, it's not a one-way relationship, it's a two-way relationship, meaning we give people the opportunity in our community to engage, give feedback, and actually inform and contribute to the product. So you'll see on the right, on the slide here, we have, as I said, 20,000+ people that read Water Deeply every month, but we have hundreds among them who actually contribute content every month. We have an advisory panel who's giving us constant feedback. We do Q&As with them. Quite often, we will get in a situation where people will say, hey, I want to write a response to something you wrote. And so we really think about that being a huge part of the value add, because if we get people to engage with the product, then the product becomes better almost by definition, and then by definition you're also cracking through the noise a lot more because people aren't just reading, they're actually engaging. And finally, media partners are there to help. We have 40+ partners that work with Water Deeply, from local in-state blogs that might focus on a specific region in California to national syndication partners. They might be producing less environmental content themselves, but that also means they might be more open to a partnership where someone who's focused on providing coverage that they miss could actually fill in some gaps for their audience. So we work with them the same way we tailor information to our own audience, to tailor it, the content we already create, so that they can amplify it even further. So don't be afraid. In fact, go out and try to engage every member of your community and media partners who might be able to give you even broader reach than the folks that are in your own community. So where does this leave us, and why are we here today? Well, we've taken a big look at oceans, and Todd, again, will talk a lot more about it because he's the one leading the editorial effort, but we found the need and we decided to dive in head first, no pun intended, and launch Oceans Deeply, which we did last week at the UN Ocean Week. And basically what we're going to try to do is replicate the model that's worked for us in other topics. So we're going to be providing consistent, comprehensive news coverage day in, day out on oceans. In fact, we're already doing it. We're going to cover every sub-issue, but they're going to be clear editorial pillars. We're going to look at the effects of climate change in the ocean, so things like ocean acidification. We're going to look at biodiversity and habitat issues. We're going to look at the blue economy, going back to being solutions-oriented. Where is the blue economy going? We're going to try a range of editorial products. We have a good sense of what could work based on other work we've done on other issues, but we want to figure out what specifically works with oceans. So what types of stories are best told in an audio format, video format, text, long-form reporting? Do those executive summaries come over? Are they as effective here, or is there a new form of content we're going to be doing for oceans? Those are the kind of things we'll be experimenting with, but we're committed to using a range of editorial products and try to figure that out. It's going to be a platform-oriented approach, going back to what I just said. It's not just going to be we put out and you guys consume. It's going to be our community is a living, breathing part of Oceans Deeply. And to that, everyone here could and should be a part of that community. And we make it very simple. We talk about two ways to be a part of the Oceans Deeply community. One is you could join. That's as simple as going to oceansdeeply.com, signing up for our newsletter, engaging with our content. And then the other thing is you can lead. And there's all those forms of leadership that I discussed. You could be part of our advisory panel. You could provide us feedback. You could raise your hand and say, I want to write an op-ed on a topic that's important to me. You could say, I read this piece of content. I got an issue with it, I want to write a response, and we'll work with you on that. We have partners that help. We have partners that say, we want you to cover this topic. We want it to be a long-form series, investigative journalism with video, with text, and all that, and we work with folks on that. So we like to make it as low touch or as high touch as you want it to be, but basically the way we try to crack through is by doing the things I discussed today and being useful and getting the engagement and involvement of everyone that's working in and around the specific issue. So with Oceans Deeply, we're super excited to take the plunge. We hope that you'll all become a member of the community, whether it be joining or leading. And I'd like to thank you today, thank you deeply for listening to what we have to say, and hope Hopefully, we'll be here a year from now with a very robust platform that's succeeded even beyond our wildest imagination. Thank you. Now I'd like to introduce Todd Woody, who is the Executive Environmental Editor for News Deeply, and of course Oceans Deeply as well, to lead a panel discussion on the topic. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Josh. The title of our panel today is Communicating in a Crowded Space, and indeed it is very crowded. Today, everyone's a publisher, from the president on down, thanks to social media. The rise of partisan media means that Americans increasingly live in different realities, tuning into the red channel or the blue channel, while the mainstream media tries to break through with fact-based reporting. Last week, the New York Times pointed out in a case study that it can take just a matter of minutes for fake news to go from a tweet to television. So, top government officials these days deny the existence of verifiable scientific facts, and scientists take to the streets to march in defense of reality. In this Mad Max media environment, how do policymakers, scientists, and advocates break through to get their message out? Today, we have a panel to help us answer that question. Danielle Fernandez, on my immediate left, is founder and CEO of Sustainable Oceans Alliance, a global organization that activates millennials to become more involved in health and sustainability of the ocean. Dr. David Schiffman is a postdoctoral research fellow at Simon Fraser University, where he studies the sustainability of shark fisheries from an interdisciplinary perspective. He's also one of the most prolific social media presences in the scientific community. And Karen Sack is the managing director of Ocean Unite and has over 20 years of experience working for international non-governmental organizations on environmental issues around the world. It would take a long time to talk about all of them, and she has extensive experience. So my first question is, how has the dominance of Facebook and Twitter and political and social discourse affected the way you try to get your message out and organize around ocean issues?
Thanks, Todd. I think in some ways it's changed everything, and in other ways it's changed nothing. As campaigners, in developing a campaign and communicating it, part of what we need to do is to identify the target audience that we're trying to reach, and then target our messages to address that audience in a meaningful way. I think many of us get disrupted by Facebook and Twitter in doing that, and we keep thinking of what can we do that'll go viral? What can we do that's going to make a difference? But sometimes that isn't necessarily the right way to think in terms of who we're trying to reach. We've all got limited resources, and we're all trying to hopefully influence either a policy decision-making process or a specific leader to drive the change. So I think the key is identifying those target audiences, and then where it fits, using Facebook and Twitter and other social media to actually engage that target audience and drive that change. So in some cases, it may mean, getting an article on the front page of a small island newspaper is what you need to do to actually drive the attention, to win the attention of the target audience you're dealing with. And so developing a whole social media campaign is relevant. In other cases, activating and building awareness, there's a big push on at the moment here, activating awareness around the marine monuments and getting that and people engaged on that through using images, using short-form messaging, using influencers. What we have learned and we try and do with Ocean Unite is to identify the influencers, the social media influencers that are going to get people to act. Often it's not a result of a membership organization, but the result of somebody, whether it's a business leader or a political leader, an actor, a comedian, and getting a message through those voices can help drive that change.
So Daniela, you use social media to build a movement among millennials who, not to stereotype, but largely live on social media. Can you talk about how you did that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we first started asking not the question of how you engage millennials, but where do you find them? And I think that as communicators, we all have to ask that question, and where are people's attention? Where does it lie? And how can we make attention one of the most important assets that we think through our day-to-day jobs? So we found out that we have Facebook and Twitter, but we also have Snapchat, you have Instagram, and you have YouTube, that are one of the main sources, platforms where people are turning their attention to. Just to give you a couple of numbers here, the average user spends 40 minutes on YouTube, 30 minutes on Facebook, 25 minutes on Snapchat, 15 minutes on Instagram, and 1 minute on Twitter. So really trying to figure out where millennials are spending their attention, how they're engaging with posts, how they're engaging with the message. That's where we started our investigation, and then we found out that it's all about solutions. We are a solution-driven generation. We are looking for the next big thing. We're looking to find out how can we redesign solutions for the ocean? How can we redesign our thinking around plastic? How can we redesign our thinking around fisheries? And we've seen that our millennials really react to positive news, to positivity. And the next step is how do we translate that interest, that passion into action? And building this movement has been fascinating because we've seen that people are stepping up to say, I have an idea, I have a passion, and I want to make sure it's showcased, and we're able to give them the platform for change, and that's what we've been so successful.
David, I met you nearly 6 years ago at a conference. I think at the time you wouldn't see a scientist on social media, which is more in its infancy at that time.
Much more unusual then, certainly.
Yeah. So now you're everywhere. Tell about your story about why did you choose this medium?
Well, the marine conservation biology community has been somewhat ahead of the curve compared to some other scientific disciplines in recognizing the importance of including stakeholders and communicating the work to stakeholders. And the shark research community especially has long recognized that public perception of sharks is not great, and that can lead to lack of political support for conservation. So there's been a long history, well before me, of shark researchers and ocean conservationists trying to communicate to various stakeholder groups. And I came across a community of a variety of scientists from all different disciplines that were using social media to communicate their research. And it can be an incredibly powerful tool for amplifying your message. It's, as Karen and Daniela have both said, it's really important to know your audience. I had someone I do social media for scientists training workshops at conferences all over the world, and I had someone after the presentation ask me, this sounds great, how can I use Twitter to reach shark fishermen in Belize? They're not on Twitter. Well, you can't. you can't. So you need to know your audience, but if you do know your audience, social media can be an incredibly powerful tool. And it has been characterized by some scholars of communications as a revolution in how humans talk to each other on the same scale as things like the written word or the printing press. It's made it easier than ever before in human history for an expert to reach large numbers of people with their expertise, or for a policymaker or journalist to find a qualified expert. So it can be an incredibly powerful tool for experts to get their work to the interested public, to journalists, to policymakers.
But I've noticed you also connect other researchers.
Yes.
You answer their questions about their postdoctoral work, their research. Can you talk a little bit how that?
Sure. A question I get a lot in my training workshops is, how can I build up an audience as big as yours on social media? And the answer I give first is, you don't really have to, because I have that audience, and I'm happy to use it to share your content. And that's true for any ocean science or conservation topics. Which is great for me because it means I get great, interesting content that I don't have to spend any time writing or finding. But if it's been really a mission of mine to amplify the voices of other scientists in my field, particularly early career people, particularly historically underrepresented minorities that might not get as big a voice in mainstream academia or journalism.
So Karen, Danielle, and I were all at the UN Ocean Conference last week, and Ocean Unite had a specific sort of target they were trying to reach, try to bring business into the conversation, like business now is a big part of the debate, or the process of climate change. Can you talk a little bit about, you had a hashtag, and why did you choose to do that?
We did. There are actually a few audiences we're trying to reach. through the business community, but the kind of hashtag and the focus of the work we're doing falls under the kind of rubric of the ocean is everybody's business. For anyone working in the ocean space, the business community, other than those that are involved in shipping, fishing, or mining, are pretty much absent. And for us, we felt that it was really important to begin to bring those business voices into the mix. We've seen this in the climate space, where the engagement of forward-looking business leaders helped to actually raise the level of ambition amongst the political decision makers. And if we look around the world, including in our backyard here, the role of business leaders is becoming more and more important in galvanizing action from political leaders. So we thought we would look at a way to engage businesses by kind of taking them on a blue voyage of looking at how they could blue their businesses and become more ocean friendly. And one of the fascinating pieces of it has been how willing the business community has actually been to step up and start thinking about the ocean. And the most common response that we've had from them is, we had absolutely no idea. But as soon as they get it, they actually are willing to look at what they're doing in business. The hashtag that we used was Our Ocean Business. We saw a number of groups. Basically what we did is we created a whole collateral pack for businesses that we've been speaking with since the beginning of the year. We shared that with them online. It included design elements, tweets, Facebook and Twitter tiles, and a whole lot of content. And they could take that and use it on any of their sites to basically blue their sites. So we're still pulling in the data to see what happened. I happen to work with one major business, which is Virgin, the Virgin Companies, and Sir Richard Branson. And so it's always good to have a leader in the field to give voice to what you're doing. And I think the other element of communicating, whether you're speaking with business or any other sectors, is to have a little bit of fun. So while we were being very serious in terms of engagement, we had a breakfast for 40 CEOs at the UN and had a very sober conversation with them. By the end of the day, we also had Sir Richard on Stephen Colbert's late night show, where he talked about World Oceans Day, and he talked about a little bit, it was kind of cut in the piece that went live, but about the role of business, but also the role of business in making solutions. And then he dropped his trousers, which was a little bit of fun, and I'm terrified that there's a picture of it behind me. You never want that to be on a screen behind you. But he was wearing a swimsuit made out of reclaimed ocean plastic, and the message was, we have to reduce what we're doing and change our manufacturing processes, but we also need to engage with solutions and entrepreneurs to drive change.
Was he wearing Adidas Parley for the Oceans shoes?
He was, and he was wearing a jacket which is produced by H&M and made with bionic yarn, which is reclaimed ocean plastic. So he was trying to give the message that there are solutions. Some people saw that as, look, we don't need to stop, worrying about plastic in the ocean. Anyone who got that message, I'm not sure how. It was pretty clear that he was trying to say, we need to focus on solutions and we need to change our behavior.
I've got a question from the audience, but I have to ask you first about Snapchat. I've got a millennial-age son, and he and all his friends, that has become the communications tool. Facebook's to organize parties and this and that. They're not on Twitter, but they are on Snapchat constantly, which I never have quite gotten as an older person. But can you talk about how you use Snapchat to reach your audience?
Sure.
And why it matters?
It matters because we are becoming more visual audience. It's all about storytelling. It's all about, self-promotion, really, when you think about it. Here I am at the UN, with Richard Branson on Snapchat. Or here I am, at this new beach spot. And it's a new way to communicate with young people. And I've seen, I think National Geographic is one of the first big organizations that jumped on board. And now they have their own Snapchat channel in which they share pictures, videos, they have quizzes. And it's very interactive because not only are you listening and learning about news sources, but you're also interacting with the platform other people are sharing stuff with. But interestingly enough, baby boomers are also starting to adopt Snapchat. And the new average is that millennials spend over their lifetime about 6 years on social media, and baby boomers are spending over 7 to 8 years on social media. So now, social media is changing drastically, and we're seeing how, our parents are adopting, our ways of using technology and social media, and understanding, how as an organization that's working on oceans, how we can leverage that power, that attention span that's being reached through Snapchat will be beneficial.
So what kind of content do you put on it?
Trips. We do interviews. We do a lot of interviews. We actually just interviewed Nishan DeGrain and Greg Stone for the new launch of their book, Soul of the Sea, How Technology Startups Will Save the Ocean. And that is the new Millennium Manifesto. All of millennials are looking forward to reading that book because, again, it's all about how can we, as a next generation, use our ideas, use technology to help change the world. So that's one of interviews, pictures, or stories.
Okay, so if people like me are on it now, it's going to be uncool, and they're going to move on to the next platform. Yes. So we have a question from the audience. Having a target audience is challenging to many organizations who serve multiple audiences. How can you effectively communicate your story when you have multiple audiences and limited resources? What are the best tools available, and how do you prioritize?
I think that's the challenge all of us have. So I work internationally. All the campaigns I've ever worked on have involved reaching out to multiple countries, sometimes 193 of them. And you can't use the same message to engage with each of those countries. It's always important, I think, as you're developing your campaign, to identify the end point you want to get to. And as you are thinking about how to get the various constituencies on board so that you can drive towards that endpoint, this is going to date me, but it's okay because I see Justin Kenny sitting in the audience, and he at least will identify with me on this. But we used to do, this is very offline stuff, but we used to do things like create what we call magic message boxes. So a magic message box is you put your constituencies up on one side in a row, and then you look at where you need to go, and you identify what the messages are in the next row down that are going to resonate with each of those constituencies to get towards your target. One of the key things you have to do in developing that is make sure that you're not developing conflicting messaging. So if you're going to talk to Brazil about high seas bottom trawling and why they should support a moratorium at the United Nations, you talk to them about the importance of the common heritage of humankind and that they aren't getting a chance to go out there. You speak to the United States, it's a very different message, and it's about the importance of protecting biological diversity or the opportunity that exists for industry in the future, in a regulated future, to engage in some kind of extractive activity. I'm just making this up as I go along. But the bottom line being, at some point, you've got to look at those two messages and make sure that when the Brazilians and the US have that conversation about why they're both supporting that issue, they're not going to conflict with one another. And that applies whether it's with individuals, countries, whether you're working within different states, whether you're working within a state at different levels of the legislature with the different constituencies that Josh was talking about earlier. You need to identify the messages that are going to resonate and use the tools then that are going to resonate with them. So if we're talking to millennials, I'm with Todd. We need to learn how to use Snapchat, and we will. Daniela's going to teach us. But when you're talking, when you're talking to policymakers on the Hill, often we go to them and we have, reams of paper and reports, and we think that's the way to reach them. Sometimes it is. Sometimes you just have to take them out a little bit to the ocean and bring in an image that is going to tell the story and help get them on board. So it really depends, and it needs to be multifaceted. And I wish it was simpler than that, but we all know it isn't.
Yeah.
I want to just echo what Karen's saying here, that you need a multi-pronged approach. Each of these platforms is a tool in your toolbox. And Twitter is Twitter is a tool for achieving a communication strategy. It is not a communication strategy in of itself. You need to know your audience and know what your audience is using and how to reach them, and different messages and different strategies for each of these different tools in a multifaceted approach. But just a lot of people just cross-post exactly the same thing across every social media platform. Sometimes you can do that, but if I posted as much on Facebook as I post on Twitter, then my Facebook friends would hate me more than they already do for how much I post. So the different platforms are not as great for some things as they are for other things. You need to know the pros and cons, and most importantly, you need to know what your audience is using. Millennials may not use Twitter very much, but one group that uses Twitter a lot is journalists. So if your goal is trying to reach journalists, Twitter is a great thing to do.
Yeah, I would also add one of the strategies we use is actually was coined by Gary Vaynerchuk. You should all look him up. He's a social media guru, and it's called jab, jab, right hook. So it's all about give, 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 and then make the ask. And what we found is that through our social media channels, we're always, informing millennials, giving them opportunities. For example, we brought a delegation to the United Nations. We're bringing 100 students to our ocean conference in Malta. So making sure we give them opportunities, we inform them, we showcase new technology, and then once in a while, we make the ask of, help us sign this petition for a marine protected area, or organize a beach cleanup in your local community. So it's all about what they're getting out of your sources, instead of thinking about what you can get from them. And I think that mentality is very difficult for some organizations that view social media as a fundraiser tool. Instead of as a communication tool to engage with the audience, to showcase their activities, to really be a contributing platform instead of just a one-way street of communication. And going back to the hashtag use, at the 3rd annual Sustainable Ocean Summit that we host, we had a hashtag called Make the Ocean Famous. And within the first couple hours, we were able to get 1.3 million social media impressions. And it's not because we created the hashtag on the spot, but it's because we coordinated with all of our NGO partners to use the same hashtag to reach their constituents. So it's more about creating a support system of NGOs who are all looking to do the same thing, to elevate the voice of the ocean, to elevate the ideas of how to protect it, and have one coordinated effort across the board that benefits all of us instead, of just one little organization working on a specific issue.
Let's take a step back from social media. Does the traditional media still matter? The New York Times, the print publications. When I was a freelancer, I wrote almost exclusively for the New York Times because they had the most influence. Policymakers read them. When you're looking at your strategy to get your message out, do you consider the old media?
There's no question that they still matter. Again, it depends on who your target audience is. So, getting a piece in the New York Times makes no difference to the leader of a small island developing state that you're trying to influence to do something. Getting a piece in their local media is really important. Then also looking at how you target that piece. So doing a photo op, if you are working with someone, and this is a small island state or on a regional or local level where you're working across this country, getting something into a local paper where there is that photo op with, there's always the child, the millennial, somebody who's going to vote for them, or someone cool that they want their constituents to see them with. That always helps. That photo may speak, the 1,000 proverbial words. In other cases, depending on who you're trying to influence, there is absolutely no question that getting the editorial piece in the New York Times or the Washington Post written on the topic you are trying to secure a win on can be absolutely critical. I think one of the things we all have to grapple with as we're working in this field is how much money we spend on media. And I think that whereas in the past there was a lot more put into paid advertising, particularly in the big papers, I'm not sure that necessarily results anymore in the same kind of impact as it used to. There obviously are other ways to reach into those audiences, but it all really depends. Again, it may not be that traditional, New York Times or Washington Post, but if you're talking about decision makers and driving policy change, those folks are not yet all millennials. They're like you and I, Todd, and they still kind of read the paper,
Even if it's online.
even if it's online.
So it's important to cultivate sources, or cultivate individual journalists, have relationships with them who are covering specific beats.
Yeah, and I don't want to
No, please.
hog the floor here, but there was a brilliant series in the New York Times last year called The Outlaw Ocean, which Ian Obina, who was an investigative journalist for the New York Times, put together. He's now actually working on a project that goes more deeply into that issue. But there's no question that without the cultivation of journalists at the traditional news media, we wouldn't have kind of over the years been able to get some of the deeper stories in. I think we don't often, there's one element of media we don't use often enough in the ocean space, and that is actually kind of the magazines and I don't know what the term is for this, the communications term, but outside magazine or Cosmopolitan or whatever it is. We don't use.
Look what Teen Vogue's been doing
Yeah,
in the political
well,
space.
We don't use those enough, and I think that is something we need to think about, again, in line with the target audiences we try to
Yeah,
reach.
and I'll just put my journalist hat on. It's interesting. I hear from PR people, I hear from businesses. I rarely hear from individual scientists or people actually doing the on-the-ground research, presumably because they're very busy doing that, and it's just not what they do. But I think that is a key thing that we should see more of, is not promoting their work in a promotional sort of look at me thing, but important issues. So I'll say, as the Running Oceans Deeply, Todd@newsdeeply.com. Send me your story ideas, tell me what you're up to. But those relationships are important because that's how you build trust, and that's how you get stories out that go beyond just the news of the day. Got a question from the audience. An indeterminate number of our national marine sanctuaries are right now the target of what's being called a review by the administration. How can we save these national treasures from being open to industrial exploitation and the approximately 130 days that remain in the review process?
One thing that I've been yelling or ranting about on social media for years is that social media can be a wonderful way to spread a message, but it should not be the entirety of your advocacy campaign. If you share a link about the marine sanctuaries under review or Bear Ears Monument being shrunk or something like that and just say, this is bad, I disagree with this, that's great that you did that, but that should not be all that you do or it will not result in change. With federal regulations, there's an opportunity for US citizens to submit a formal public comment, and those are taken much, much, much more seriously than goofy online internet petitions that are written by someone that doesn't have a clue what they're talking about, that are frequently full of errors or don't have a specific ask or are directed to the wrong person. I see in the shark conservation world, I see internet petitions a couple times a year when I was in Florida asking either President Obama or the Secretary General of the United Nations to do something about shark fisheries laws in Florida. That's not how jurisdiction works. They can't. So that petition, even if it got a billion signatures, it could not possibly achieve its goal because its goal is preposterous and not based in reality. So you need to. There is an inherent way that the U.S. government has to receive public comments from concerned citizens, including technical experts. Take advantage of that. That doesn't mean don't also share on social media the news that I disagree with this decision to shrink the borders of Bear Ears National Monument. But that should not be all that you do. There's terms slacktivism or clicktivism that have been used to describe this. And there's value in it. As was said earlier this morning, there's nothing wrong with preaching to the choir. Preaching to the choir, the choir is there because they want to listen. But that cannot be all that you do.
So Daniel, do you activate your members on policy issues?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that just going off of what was said already, it's all about tangible change and how can you make a campaign very active and very easily accessible. Because as we talked about, millennials and really all of us now that we've been on our phones day to day, we have a very short attention span. So making it an easy campaign, so you click here or here are the exact steps of how to reach that process or how to submit your comments. I think that's the best way to do it. And we've ran a bunch of different petitions through change.org. We help organize students to petition constitute their local governments and constituencies, depending on, waterway cleanups or marine protected areas. Our chapter in Peru actually was the very first youth organization to ever go and petition the government on the marine protected area. They met with the fisheries ministry, and he was like, "Oh, we've never seen young people come and knock at our doors and demand a meeting and ask for this protection for their generation of for years to come." So I think that it definitely is relevant. But activating people by providing the clear next steps is what a lot of campaigns miss.
I think we just saw with the British elections the power of youth in a big way. Karen, do you have anything to add?
I'm going to be more cynical here. I think the online stuff is great, particularly when it comes to activating and building awareness. But as a community, particularly in defending the monuments in this country, I think key is that organizations work together to develop a strategy to push forward with their engagement and awareness. I frankly don't think that the current administration is going to care a whit whether they get 5 comments or 5 million comments. And so I think it is time to go deeper, and that includes legal strategies and kind of activating in the same way that the ACLU has activated in this country to get people engaged in defending rights. We need to do that as the ocean community and work with the lands folks to make sure that that is done too. I think it's almost easy for us to slip into a social media campaign, and sometimes in some eras and in some places in the world, that just doesn't work. And that's when we've got to step it up together. And I think that's the interesting thing about what News Deeply is doing with Oceans Deeply. They actually are giving us a little bit of instruction as the ocean community. You probably don't know this, but it's, our space is very fragmented. We are superb at talking to one another and agreeing madly with one another about what needs to be done. We need to reach beyond that. And those are the audiences we've got to start reaching, and sometimes that needs to have a little bit of a hard edge on it if we're going to drive change.
A good question from the audience. It's very relevant to where we are. Government agencies are limited in their ability to communicate with the public via social media. How can we keep up in this space? How can we increase our voice, our message?
So I gave a seminar at the National Marine Fisheries Service headquarters a couple of years ago, and I talked about this, that the current environmental agencies' employees are often not allowed to publicly comment on social media as a representative of that agency, even in response to reasonable, straightforward questions from constituents that they obviously know the answers to. They sometimes have to go through a communications office or get things approved. And this leads to things taking a really long time, and sometimes a message spiraling out of control when it could have perhaps been diffused by an expert at that agency quickly saying, actually, no, we're not doing that, it's this instead. What I suggested there, and what I would love to see happen, is for there to be some sort of fast response team within some of these agencies that if an expert has a question, they can get it approved in half an hour. Is it okay that I say this? Or even have a list of topics they're allowed to discuss and tone they're allowed to use approved in advance. Because the amazing thing about social media is it's a powerful instant tool that can be a really amazing way to communicate with stakeholders all over the country or all over the world. But if you're not allowed to respond, and there's good reasons for that, but if you're not allowed to respond at all, or if it takes weeks to get a reply or a comment approved, then you're going to miss out on a lot of opportunities to engage with stakeholders.
One question came from the audience is, how do you fight fake news and get your message out?
I don't think any ocean science communicators were particularly surprised by this fake news phenomenon. If you watched the Discovery Channel or Animal Planet over the last few years with these specials about mermaids and megalodons and things like that. So we were not particularly shocked by this. It's important to call it out. And I've seen a lot of ideologically similarly minded colleagues sharing fake news of a variety of kinds, not just science, but also a lot of politics lately. And it's a problem, because we need to be informed about what's going on. So it's not worth getting in giant fights with your high school friend that you're still social media contacts with over, but it's worth, I think, gently pointing out, this is not real, here's how we know it's not real. And this happens a lot in the ocean science and conservation world and in the environmental world. There's a lot of just wrong, just made up information that gets spread around. There are some websites that do this on purpose to make money because of the sharing. There was a story that went super viral on Facebook a couple years ago that loggers actually accidentally cut down the oldest tree in the Amazon rainforest that was the last of its kind, and it was super protected. That didn't happen. It was completely made up to get clicks. And it was shared like 500,000 times in the first hour. So it's a big problem. Media literacy is a problem that is not limited to politics.
Yeah, and it happens on both sides of the
For sure.
ideological divide. So Daniela, your audience grew up with this medium. Do you have any particular strategies when it comes to getting the message out and cutting through the fake news or wrong information?
Yeah, I think we're more skeptical, actually, of the fake news that are out there because we know how easy it is to create content. We know how easy it is to put a WikiLink page or a WordPress and create our own thoughts. And it seems to me that millennials are more likely to share news from trusted sources because their reputation is on the line. And when you see millennials talking about, I heard about this, I heard about that, what we see through our members is that they're talking about The Economist, they're talking about the New York Times. They're never really sharing, those really shady websites that exist out there because they trust information where it's coming from. And even during the presidential election, what we've seen is that millennials are the ones acting for the fact checkers. So I think we're already the fact checking, constituency that's looking, for that doesn't sound right or that doesn't, feel like it's the truth. So we're less likely to be, just dismissed information that is not accurate.
So Karen, when we started our careers, reality was something most people believed in. We sort of believed in scientific facts. I know, ancient. How do you think mainstream environmental organizations, ocean organizations are sort of prepared for this new reality, the way they've traditionally communicated, got their message out?
I could alienate myself in a major way from some of my colleagues by my response. But they know me, and I don't think we're prepared, to be perfectly honest. I think that we are still living in a world where we communicate directly to certain supporter groups. We try and make sure that we are fundraising off those supporter groups and that we are targeting our messages to them. And I think what we need to learn, from people like Dan and Daniela, is that there are different ways to communicate, that trusted source is actually really, really important. And so oftentimes, we are seeing in some of the work that we're doing that people are not going back to NRDC or WWF or Oceana or Greenpeace or some of the bigger NGOs to get their source of news or to verify the information that they're getting. They'll believe those folks when they get it, if they subscribe to it. What they're more interested in are the social media influencers who they trust. Now that may be a big news outlet like The Economist or the New York Times, but it may also be certain individuals. And I think as the ocean community, part of what we need to do is to identify some of those individuals and make sure that they have the words to communicate to this broader audience what the stories and the way we want those stories to be told, so that there is verification and reality to them. One of the challenges, obviously, is there's so much noise out there, and we have to get through some of that noise. And it's quite interesting, again, in our space. We're all telling different stories. Our messaging is incredibly fragmented. So the people who are working on overfishing in the US don't necessarily speak to the people who are working on monuments in the US, who don't necessarily speak to folks working on those issues internationally. The people working in the Antarctic don't necessarily speak to the people in the Arctic. And if we actually, recognizing the limits on resources we have, the constant barrage of news that people are getting, we have to find a better way of actually pulling some of that information together and defragmenting our space. Now, how we do that is the million-dollar question. It's probably a $50 million question, and we don't necessarily have the resources in our space to do that. But I think it's something we have to think very carefully about, or we run the risk of becoming irrelevant in a space where there is news all the time, and it's, there's only one Dan sitting here. There isn't, there's just so much you can do, and there's just so much that others can do as well. So it actually it is very worthwhile, and if there are any groups that are here that are interested in it, to actually, let's break down some of the barriers between our organizations, take some of our organizational hats off, and be, ocean defenders or ocean warriors or whatever else you want to call them, and come up with some common plans that we can drive forward with.
I'll tell you one thing we did, which we were developing Oceans Deeply, was we wanted to see what the ocean community was talking about. I'm on Twitter all the time because I'm a journalist, but sometimes it's overwhelming. This is too much information. But curated lists. So we identify those people, influencers, created an Oceans list, and I add to it. And it's proved very effective across various disciplines. Like, oh, this is what someone's doing, this is what else is doing. They just published this study, or this campaign's going on. And I think environmental groups could use that same technique too, to find out what people are working on across various silos, as they say.
So I would just want to add more about our long-term approach of how to deal with the skeptics, the more conservative community that exists out there. I think that, when I started the Sustainable Oceans Alliance, our approach was not to get millennials who were interested in being the next scientist or the next conservationist. We were looking to engage the next CEOs, the next designers, the next health experts, because we wanted to integrate this idea of helping to protect the ocean within their own careers. And our model right now is creating different university chapters all over the world. So instead of talking about the ocean as an environmental issue, we're talking about the ocean as a health issue. We're talking about the ocean, as a animal crisis issue, and that's how we can reach the more conservative campuses who are willing to start a Sustainable Oceans Alliance chapter, not because they believe that climate change exists, but because they're interested about how does that affect my health down the line, or how can I use the ocean plastic as a resource, as a tool, instead of making the argument about the environmental movement. So we're really trying to make sure that we engage the larger youth community, instead of just focusing on the people that already digest this news and believe in the climate affairs.
Or as Sylvia Earle says, everyone likes to breathe, and the ocean provides about half of our oxygen. Well, David, I think this question's for you. Posting on social media, how much is too much? How does one determine the right balance between too many and too few posts?
That's a great question, and the difference between too many and too few depends on your goals. It depends on your employment situation or your employer. It's very easy to get sucked in and spend a whole afternoon arguing about something that 2 days later you realize didn't really matter that much on social media, and you can't let yourself do that. I set very strict, people who follow me on social media will be shocked to learn this, but I set very strict time limits for myself, and I don't go over them for how much time I can spend on social media. Even if there's the biggest shark science on Twitter emergency in the history of the world, whatever that might look like, I only have half an hour this day until work is over that I can devote on this over my lunch break. So in terms of too much or too little, it depends somewhat on platform also. I try not to post more than 3 to 5 things per day on Facebook. I post a lot more than that on Twitter on any given day. Instagram, some people do as infrequently as once a week or a few times a week, so it varies. You have some people that don't really want to follow you if you're just tweeting constantly, and that's fine. There may be some people who unfollow you if you don't tweet regularly enough, because you're just taking up a spot that could otherwise be filled by someone that contributes more regularly. So it depends on your goals, it depends on your strategy, it depends on a lot of specific cases. But time management, I think, is probably the most important factor here. For me, as a postdoc, my day job comes first. And I believe that it's very important for scientists such as myself to spend time communicating with stakeholders and with the public about these ocean science and conservation policy issues. But that is not my day job. And my day job comes first. And we get in arguments about this all the time on social media, but if you are not my employer, it is not your place to tell me what is or is not part of my job.
So, Danielle and Karen, you also spend quite a bit of time at conferences like this, getting your message out. I think this is the third time you've been at the same one in the last 6 weeks. How effective is that, and why do you do it as far as reaching an audience?
You know, again, I think it depends on the audiences you're trying to reach. This is my thing of the day, my mantra of the day. I think that when you are I actually tend to use social media more when I'm actually at those conferences than when I'm working, doing my regular day job, because it's pretty much the only time I can sit there and I can take an image and I can try and think in 140 characters. But you know, I think that it's important to get those messages both to the people at the conference, but also folks beyond it. We combine that kind of people being at the conference with work that we have lined up sometimes, you know, months in advance. So again, last week, using that as an example, we had specific folders and themes for each day of the week that we were pushing content out to a whole lot of the partners that we work with, in the hope that they could stay focused a little bit on those themes, but push that message out. And then we would try and make sure that our social media accorded with that, so that there was a big push going on those specific issues. I think some of the better times to actually engage with social media is when, you know, there's absolutely nothing going on. But generally, I think the space is so crowded that you can always find an academic article that's coming out. I think there is a lot of news that is coming out from elsewhere in the world where there are lessons to be learned from that in terms of what other folks are doing. And so we try and make those connections and push some of those things out too.
Yeah, and our strategy is really to give access to those millennials who are all over the world watching us or following our pages. We do a lot of live videos, live interviews, you know, and we get millennials to ask their questions and, you know, continue that dialogue to make sure that they feel like they're part of the larger conversation. The other thing we do a lot is share content on Instagram daily. We make sure we post different ocean pictures. Actually, the Packard Foundation, I'll give a shout out to them today. They just released a study on how to engage millennials. It's called Gateway to Engaging the Next Generation of Ocean Conservationists. And I encourage you all to read it. And they found that plastic is that gateway. And if millennials see, how many of you have seen the video of the turtle with the straw being taken out of its nose? Raise your hand. Okay, and then there's the other video of, you know, the turtle having 1,000 coins taken out of their belly through surgery. That video got 30 million, you know, views on social media and it went viral. And that's what they found was one of the most compelling ways to get millennials to say, I care about the issue. You know, I'm seeing this animal being hurt by my actions. So I guess the next question is, how do we translate that interest or that pain that we feel in seeing those videos into practicality, into, you know, I'm going to change my habits, or I'm going to, you know, advocate as a consumer. You know, we tell our millennials, you know, you can talk to your company where you're working. You can, you know, through your own personal investments. So there's a $30 trillion transfer of wealth that will be happening from baby boomers to millennials, and that will all go towards impact investing because millennials are pushing that idea of you know, using their investments for social good. So we really try to target as our audience on not only, you know, be informed and, you know, feel bad for these animals, but also act upon it and be a, you know, conscious consumer.
Yeah. I know Silicon Valley, the neck of woods where I come from, a big aspect of getting companies to be proactive on climate change issue was their employees. Mm-hmm. As an employee retention strategy, and that they wanted to show their employees that they cared about the issues they cared about, which I don't think we quite have seen so much on ocean issues yet, but it seems like it's something we will going forward. Question from the audience, do you find that social media platforms magnify polarities? How do you break through the segmented groupthink that algorithms help create?
Oh my God, yes. Social media absolutely magnifies polarity. There was just a thread this morning on Twitter with respect to the horrible shooting earlier this morning that someone from some journalist professional society was sharing about how Twitter is not necessarily reflective of the real world. On Twitter, the loudest voices get amplified in some cases because you hate what they're saying, in some cases because you love what they're saying, but most people are not necessarily as polarized as the loudest voices you encounter on Twitter. And it's been, I think, a not good thing for political engagement in the country. And particularly with some highly politicized issues like climate change, it can be a really big problem. But even with things like fishing, I had something a little while ago on Facebook that someone was illegally fishing for an endangered sawfish in Florida. Vice President Pence happened to be walking by on the beach and posed for a picture with this guy who was catching a sawfish illegally. Vice President Pence was not the one who did it, but he posed for a picture with this illegally caught fish. And I shared a news article that pointed out that this fish was illegal, and a lot of conservatives were very angry at me for attacking the vice president. I'm pointing out that the angler broke the law. The vice president chose to take a picture with him. Like, I'm not attacking Vice President Pence. But it's just that certain keywords just trigger. The Oatmeal webcomic actually had a wonderful story about this recently, about how some facts you're more willing to accept, what I've always thought was true is not necessarily true than others. And you can experiment with this for yourself, and that helps you understand the other side more. As for how to effectively break through it, if anyone figures that out, let me know. But it's definitely a problem and something you need to be aware of.
Yeah, I think one of the things, and also, I think that's the magic bullet all of us wants to know, but one of the things we've done at Ocean Unite is, the whole reason we were established was to bring together a group of impactful voices to help drive ocean conservation action at key moments that matter. And so we have actually put together a network of, it's about 35 people at the moment, previous presidents, prime ministers, foreign ministers, finance ministers, business leaders, social media influencers. And what we try and make sure is that they come from different walks of life, they have different political backgrounds, and we try and make sure that at times they are putting out the same message, and that message is being heard from what we call strange bedfellows at the same time, and that message is beginning to resonate. And that seems to be a way to break through some of the noise, because if it's someone who you respect, or someone who you don't necessarily respect but will listen to, and they're both saying the same thing, people sometimes sit up and listen. And so that's one of the strategies we're using to try and get messages across, to break through both the noise, but also potentially the algorithms.
Yeah, and what we've used is Facebook private groups to get our millennials together, no matter what country they're coming from, no matter what their background is, to share content, to share their reach, to share their ideas, to share different strategies of how they're tackling different ocean problems within their communities. And that's been really effective because they're not concerned about what their friends will think, or how they should be amplifying their voice, or how many likes they're going to get, but they're just interested about sharing content and learning from each other. So just creating this community of learning within different groups. I would encourage you all, to look into these private groups depending on, what your projects are, because they're very effective.
Right. A question from the audience: how can we change the scientific culture to promote direct communication between scientists and the public? Because it's true, scientists are scientists first, and they have no incentive for them to take the time from research to interact with the public.
That's a great question. And again, my day job is my research, not the public outreach that I do. When I'm answering people's questions on Twitter, that's not instead of my day job, that's instead of watching TV or instead of playing a game or something like that. That's in my time. Right now, there's not a lot of incentive for this stuff. And in fact, I've been explicitly told as an early career researcher, my public outreach has made it so some universities, some departments would not even consider hiring me. And how we change that is we need to value public outreach. We hear all the time from tech leaders and from politicians that it's so important that scientists break out of the ivory tower, but then the people making hiring and promotion decisions in the ivory tower not only don't value it, but actively look down on it sometimes. So it's something that needs to be changed, and it could be as simple as counting that stuff as leadership and service, right, when right now in many cases it doesn't. It could be as simple as more explicitly requiring it from funding agencies. National Science Foundation has broader impacts, and this social media outreach or talking in schools about your research or things like that can count as that. So the culture needs to change if outreach is going to continue. I hear rants all the time about how all scientists need to do this. I don't think that's true, but I think the scientists that want to do this should be more encouraged and certainly not punished professionally for doing it, which right now many are.
Another question, as Karen said, we all listen to each other, yet all the metrics traditional social media show space narratives are orders of magnitude more popular than ocean narratives. How can we move the needle regarding ocean stories?
Yeah, I mean, this actually continues from these earlier comments. So becoming good communicators just doesn't happen, right? I think often we think that that's, we'll just become good communicators. I still, for example, from my perspective, communications is not, my priority. I'm a policy wonk by training. I am much happier with a thick legal document, working out where commas and whether there should be an and or a shall or a will, than communicating to a lay audience. And we actually need to help one another and get communications training to be better at communicating. I think that's one key element. And this is, again, I think within the organizations we work with, but also the philanthropists we work with, somehow we have to communicate to them, and maybe some of the communicators here can help, that learning how to communicate and communicating well is the most incredible investment that we can make in actually driving the issue forward, which gets to the space question. When you hear some of the NASA astronauts stand up and speak to audiences about the impact that going into space has had for them, those are personal stories and they resonate. And some of those folks are incredibly good at storytelling. And that's part of their training. Part of their training is to reach out to audiences and to give them, to get them involved. They also have these amazing images. Now, we have those images too, and we need to learn how to use them. I think the challenge is, again, identifying the key messages that we can all begin to use, that we can drive home to the constituents that we're trying to build into a constituency. There's an amazing movie that will be released next month, called Chasing Coral by Jeff Orlowski. And there are lots of films about the ocean, and they're lovely, and we sit down and we watch everything swimming by, and the music plays, and we're all happy. But they don't necessarily provide the message that then resonates to a broader audience. My sense is that what Jeff has managed to do in that movie, without whacking people over the head with a message, is to draw them in and get their hearts and their minds to believe in those messages. And I think that's part of what we have to do as well. It's not just about the statistics and the science, it's also about what resonates with people's hearts and their belief systems. So I guess the bottom line is we all need to learn how to communicate better, and we need to invest in those communications and start saying the same messages over and over again. I just want to finish with one thing. Sorry, this has gone on for a bit, but one of the best things I was ever told by a veteran campaigner who has worked on some of the biggest global issues is, when we get sick and tired of providing our message, when we just can't wake up in the morning and say it again, is when the audiences that we're speaking to begin to hear it. So I think that's part of the lesson in this is, it's easy to switch messages, it's easy to chop and change, there's so many different things going on. We need to stay focused and get those kind of core messages out and all be speaking with one voice on some of them.
Well, that is a very good way to end this panel, because we're out of time, but I'm going to thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much for a fantastic panel. I learned a lot. Everybody, we look forward to seeing you back here at 3:30. I wanted to let you know we have a really special panel next. It's a congressional roundtable. We'll be joined by Senator Whitehouse, Senator Sullivan, and Representative Kilmer to talk about what their visions are for our oceans and Great Lakes. So look forward to seeing you at 3:30. Thank you. Oh, and sorry, don't forget to tune in to Oceans Live. Bye-bye.